Okay, great. Hello, everyone. All right. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Success Paradigms. Can't even speak. This is going to be a fun one. Success
Oh, you can edit
Paradigms,
that out later.
episode 24. No, we're live.
Okay.
Episode 24. And with me, as always, is Mr. Andrew Barker.
Happy to be here.
And today we have Stefan Bielski, right?
Mm-hmm.
I normally chop those, so
That's all right. I've been called worse.
yeah, we all have. Stefan. Now I did call you worse.
That's fine.
Man, Andrew, you're gonna have to handle this one
It's
apparently.
gonna be a fun. It's gonna be a fun Monday, huh? Monday evening.
It's been a long Monday. But we have a Stefan from Profession
Well,
from
yeah.
Purpose, and we're just gonna have fun today. And as you can see, I'm stumbling on myself. So yeah, if we do at the end of the year, Andrew, remind me to do a bloopers. I think we'll get a few of them from this show. But anyway, Stefan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where, because we'll get into your profession and what you're doing nowadays.
Mhm.
And I got a phrase that you mentioned, I think on one of your emails that I got to say it really struck home.
Okay.
But first of all, where were you born? Where are you from originally?
So I was born in Annapolis, Maryland, which is a small colonial town, capital of Maryland. It's where it was actually capital of the United States for a short term. It's where the U.S. Naval Academy is, and where George Washington resigned his commission. So it's got a lot of history there, which is what I studied eventually in college. And so I grew up around there, and actually I'm back in the area for past few years. So after about 20 years abroad, as well as some other places.
One of my mentors actually studied to be a history teacher.
Mm.
Then he went into the army and into financial services and so. But it gets very interesting when you start talking about.
My dad studied history and went into everything.
You're kind of frozen, so I can hear you talk. But
Oh, frozen at the beach.
Where did you study undergrad?
I finished my degree at the College of Worcester, a small liberal arts college in Ohio. I started out because I actually went to work full time right after high school. So
Wow.
I went to 2 years of night school at Johns Hopkins from like 18 to 20.
Okay.
So,
And what was that? What was that first job?
I worked for a startup. A couple recent college grads started business that was sort of like a concierge courier type business. They knew that there was other small businesses out there that needed help, couldn't do all these things for themselves, but they wanted someone who could like represent them. So a lot of it was just errand running, but it was also sort of being, we had to wear a tie even in the hot summer and
We're going way back if you had to wear a tie.
But it was nice. I had a
Don't
I
laugh
got
about wearing a tie.
I got a
My
company
industry
car and a
still
car
wears a tie.
phone back when
You had a car phone back then? Wow.
yeah, back when doctors and drug dealers still had pagers even. So that was what I was happiest with, at that time. But it was great to just get that exposure to some entrepreneurs that were like creating their own way. And I didn't really know that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. And it was probably a decade later before I considered myself an entrepreneur, but it was definitely that first seed I got. So I did that till they sold the company to another company. I didn't like the new owners, so I quit and I got my real estate license and sold real estate, or tried to sell real estate at 19. While
There's a difference there.
Yeah, yes, there is. It's hard at 19, and I was always I had a late bloomer in that sense. So, waited tables to pay the bills. And then after about a year of that, I gave that up to get a job working in DC for a think tank. For
Okay. So I heard somewhere in between when we were talking earlier that you also like the gringo below, well, on my screen below. You also
Yeah.
lived in Mexico for a while.
Yes, I did. I first went there. I guess my first trip to Mexico was in 2000. I was there, it's like end of June, July, to interview at the MBA program in Monterrey that I was going to attend. And that same weekend, I flew down into Mexico City and was there when Vicente Fox was elected. And I saw that
Wow, that's
on
historic.
Paseo de Reforma and Hell de Independencia. Saw all the sort of celebrations there. Of course, it was like ley seca, so I couldn't get a drink anywhere in the whole country. So I said, I promise not to vote, really, but didn't work.
Hey, being Mexico, you don't know. Maybe you did vote.
Let's not get onto that topic today.
So we're not going that way.
I think it's
back
been 20
then.
years, so there's got to be a
Yeah.
statute of limitations for election commentary.
Oh,
But
God.
I mentioned that because I mentioned my first degree was in history, and so I had this sense that the history of Mexico was about to change, and it reminded me of in the 90s I lived in Eastern Europe, and there was all that sort of like, and maybe I'm importing my own understanding of it, but the PRE had been in power as long as the Communist Party had been in power in Russia. So I think that was in some ways there are some parallels there. I don't think it's not quite as dramatic, but there are some parallels.
Yeah, very interesting. So you just mentioned that was your first degree. What was the second?
The MBA.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And the MBA was in just business or?
It was a general. In fact, my program, we all took the same classes. So it was actually leadership. Technically was a master's of business leadership, a little bit more holistic than your typical MBA. We had like a philosopher and a theologian. We had a geologist. We had a couple psychologists. We had
Theologian? Yeah, that's what's.
Yeah, French spy. We had some interesting ones. We had business law. We had it was like the he was actually the number 2 lawyer. He was a U.S. Solicitor General. He was the chief of the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. We had the math guy on NPR teaching us calculus. So it's an interesting mix. It was modeled largely on INSEAD, but it was funded by Alfonso Romo, who was running Grupo Pulsar in Monterrey. Actually, now I think he's AMLO's chief of staff. So he was then a billionaire, and he wanted to basically create a school, because this is before ITESM had its own MBA program for Mexico. And so he paid gobs of money. He paid my professors were paid like $2,000 to $5,000 a day to come to Monterrey to teach us. And it was so I did the math back then. It was basically my cost of my education was like $250,000, and for the 1 year, and even people paid full tuition only paid maybe a little more than a tenth of that. So it only lasted about 7 years before it just realized it just didn't make sense. Not a good business model. It didn't have MBA.
The tech still has a good rep.
I'm sorry?
Tech still has a good rep.
Right. But it's not, So it's still, it's not, well, then also before it ended was Tech opened its own MBA program. So it was sort of a more competitor for that. So that's what brought me to Mexico.
Cool. So most of the time in Mexico City?
Most of the time Mexico City, yeah, about maybe 15 months in Monterrey, and then over 5 years total in Mexico City, five,
You're
6
an
years, somewhere in there.
honorary Chilango.
Honorary Chilango, yeah. Yeah, actually, probably, I am, because Chilangos are, I think the definition is someone who comes from the, the provinces, and so I just say, I come from a province, from the north.
Well, you came from
Oaxaca.
Monterrey, so
Yeah, further north,
with a stop at Monterrey.
but a stopover in Monterey, yeah.
Very cool. So after you did your MBA, you came back up to Washington, the North area? Or?
No, my plan when I finished my MBA was to I didn't get I didn't have a job when I graduated. So my plan was to move back to New York City, where I'd worked until like a few days before my program started. I worked for Citibank on Wall Street. And I thought, well, I'll go back there and see what there is. And then 2 weeks later, 2 planes flew into the World Trade Center. So I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to be moving back there. So I stayed in Monterey for a bit, and then moved down to the FA. And actually, I took a good bit of time off. I wanted to learn Spanish. My program was all in English, and they offered me classes, at free when I was studying in Spanish, but it was really hard with all the workload to get far. So bit in the FA, and then moved down. Then was in Guatemala, where you could get basically one-on-one Spanish lessons for less than the cost of group lessons in Mexico City, and lower cost of living. So I was down there for about 5 months. I managed a little NGO in a small indigenous town in the Highlands.
Very good. So before that, you mentioned you worked in New York City, Citibank, was it?
Citibank, yeah, 111 Wall.
Okay. So what were you doing there?
It was
major Citibank.
Yeah. So I basically got it because it was basically institutional customer service. So we were like, it was troubleshooting if basically, bank transfers didn't go right, we had this like know your customer training and so forth. And they wanted someone for their Eastern, they had different regional ones. So there was a lot of there was like a Latin American section. It was across the room, and I was from like the Eastern European area. And I lived mostly in Poland for about 5 years before that. Also, yeah, and so I knew that area. And so this was basically when I moved back to the States, and I ended up being there only several months before I went for the MBA. So
okay, so we've jumped around.
We have,
US
yeah.
and Mexico, but before that, there was Poland.
It was Poland, yeah. So I moved to Poland about 6 weeks after graduating college.
Okay, we're getting back to doing chronological.
Yeah. I find chronological boring. I mean, it just sounds like, yeah.
It's not boring in your case. It's not boring in your case.
So I finally went away to college full time, graduated, degree in history, and in a bad job market, and had spent a summer in Poland. And my ancestry, long ago, my great grandparents came from Poland, so I wanted to see that during this time of change. So moved there in '94, and just taught. I was kind of a volunteer at a UNESCO program, summer program, and then decided on Warsaw. Started getting jobs teaching English and doing some freelance editing. Eventually, I got a job helping to start up a newspaper that had already been in Budapest, Business Weekly, and did that for a year or so. And during that time, they said they're looking for other ideas. So I took them an idea. And they thought that I wanted to do in-house, to do like a city magazine. And they thought about it and said no. And so I basically quit and launched that. So it was like, about this time, 25 years ago, January 25th is full time. We had first issue was out, I guess, April of '95. And then ended up selling a few years later. Still running about 20. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. And this has probably been the quarter century toughest on print media in the past since Gutenberg, probably.
Right.
Wow. All right. So now jumping back to after Mexico, back to the US.
Hmm.
At that point, was that when your real entrepreneurship started kicking in, or?
I think when I didn't really see, I think with this business that that I did also in Warsaw with yeah, that it was only after I started, I really thought I was an entrepreneur. In fact, I wanted to do it in-house. I was a reluctant entrepreneur. But they didn't want to do it. And the idea of not doing it was greater than the fear of doing that on my own. And also I wasn't doing so well in that job. I got demoted, my salary cut. So, the
I'm chuckling just because we know other people, Emilio and I, that have sort of similar experiences from the corporate ladder and just saying, hey, enough with that, and then going the entrepreneurial route.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Our host, for example.
Yeah, I got just tastes of it. I'd worked for mostly small businesses and realized it kind of wasn't a right fit for me. I kept on trying for a while, but never, yeah.
Okay.
Not,
And then if I recall, you came back to Mexico. You went from Mexico to Argentina and then back to Mexico?
largely, yeah. I think, detours through Europe and US, but yes, largely, yeah.
Yeah, as you said earlier, you were all over the map. Okay.
And
I
don't do
was,
it
yeah. So
chronologically.
I was single. I could do that. Some other opportunities, or wanted to take some breaks, so I took some, or had like a consulting gig in the U.S. or spent 6 months in Europe, those sort of things. So yeah, largely I came back. Argentina, I had another magazine, same magazine basically I had in Poland. I had in Argentina. Didn't go nearly as well. Shut it down. Difficult place to do business. And
Would you say tougher than Mexico or just a different style?
different kind of difficult, I think. Yes, I mean it's everything. The businesses I had in Mexico were advisory businesses, so I think that's really that you can probably do almost anywhere with equal. There isn't much difference. Whereas if you're publishing a magazine, a printing, it's different. I mean, my smarter friends in Buenos Aires were, basically commuting. They were, living there and working for companies in the U.S. and Europe and elsewhere. So, head to head, I mean, I thought of doing a magazine in Mexico. I never did. So it's really hard to make that comparison,
Right.
but a different type of, I mean, yeah, Argentina has different types of problems. It doesn't have real problems. It has, it's an own enemy type of problem, own worst enemy in some ways. So,
Not going there.
yeah.
All right, let's just shift gears a little bit. I was saying at the beginning that there was a quote that you put in somewhere that it really clicked, and I want to see if you can go a little bit further in there for all the viewers, listeners. You were talking about success in the way you see it. It's the old saying, it's who you know, not what you know, that's important. But I liked it when you said you got to clarify that the first who has to be yourself. Because if you don't know yourself, then nothing's going to really matter at the end. Or that's kind of what I get out of it. But obviously it's your saying, so I'd like to hear more about the thought process behind that, and a little bit, obviously, through that, what is it that you're currently doing?
Right. So I think I realized this from doing those advisory businesses that I talked about. I'd started in Mexico. And the first one was advising, and I started this right after my own MBA, was advising applicants to MBA programs. And I saw that one, for them to get into a top program, they really ultimately had to cultivate and communicate self-knowledge, which was, what they want to be when they grow up and how that program would get them there. What are the situations, the context that they did their most engaging work? What was their roles, the responsibilities, who did they work with, et cetera. And so that application process requires all these essays and a personal statement and interviews and letters of recommendation, forces people to do that sort of reckoning. And from that, I saw that that people were a number of things. Well, one is they were confused about their motivations. They wanted an MBA, but weren't clear why they wanted an MBA. Often it was because they were trying to get out of an existing business, existing employer, or in cases, sometimes I think Mexico as well as in Asia, maybe they're also trying to get out of their parents' house, and maybe often even a relationship and their home country or home city. And from that, I saw that the process is good for you, even if you don't, in the end, go do the MBA. And I had a few clients, even early on, who said, I don't, I had one early on the first year or two, said, I don't know what I want to do. I know I don't want an MBA. Basically, for working with you, I realized I don't want an MBA, and now I know what I want to do. And often that was entrepreneurship. Sometimes it was an opportunity in the family business. Sometimes it was something else entirely. Sometimes from that process of actually talking to people that they're working with now, or they are talking in their target industry, they'll uncover opportunities that they could exploit, without an MBA.
So I love that, just because I got the kind of same kind of thinking, but applied to college. So, and I got to be careful because my wife's in the other room, but my way of thinking, I've always told her, if the kids want to go to college, great.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, they can study something else and go through some stuff like you're describing to figure out what they want to do. But I was never a good school attending person per se, even though I did my MBA and everything as well. Yeah, you laugh, Andrew, because you already know I was at 3 different colleges.
I only know because Emilio's been very open as you're being, Stefan. He shared it with on some other shows, but yes, I'm laughing for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was asked to leave one of the colleges, so it was not my decision. But anyway, but that's my train of thought. I'm like, it's better if you do actually the analysis of what you want to do. And I've shared this in the past. Through what I do, I find a lot of statistics, but nowadays, 80% of people that go to college, within the first 2 years of majoring, they're doing something completely different. Which to me means that they didn't really know what they were doing. They just basically went because it was the next step.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I would say I never intended to do something professionally, be a history professor or teacher or something along those lines. But when I kind of went in, when I declared that, and I graduated like a day shy of my 25th birthday, so a bit late. But at that point, I realized that
you were early.
I'm sorry, earlier than you. Okay, yeah.
Overachiever.
So yeah, but I agree. It's like I think the this disconnect from the major is to be noted. I don't know if it's necessarily a reason not to do college. I think it's getting clarity about what you're expecting from college and what's reasonable or not, because it's gotten much more expensive. And right. I think the ROI often isn't there for that, or the ROI is you're letting your 17, 18-year-old self make these decisions that you're going to be stuck with for a decade if you're going into debt.
Yeah, and again, one of those boring statistics, but they say about 70 to 75% of students now take 6.5 years because they change majors.
Yeah.
What was that? How many years?
6.5. That's one of the other reasons the the student debt has gone up so high is because they don't go 4 years, they go 6.5.
Right, right.
So that's one of the other ones that I was like, okay, figure out what you really want. And as you said, sometimes it's doing something, you do it on the MBA side of it, but kind of get the experience and see, is this really what I want to do, or is it
Right.
something different?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the thing, figuring out, and that's tricky if you're, you know, when you're 17, 18 and haven't really done anything yet. Because you can't take an exam. You can't take one of those psychometric tests that tells you, you know, you can be this or
You
that.
can't, those don't work.
What they work at is when you already have work experience and say, oh, okay, that's why I saw that project different than my teammates, or that's why we clashed, or something. I think it's a tool for helping you get reflection, but on the experience you've already done. But I don't it's not, it's descriptive of what's the past, but it's not prescriptive.
Right.
Okay, that's an
Because
interesting.
even in business, there's more and more use of if you look at a new psychometric model every other year or so.
Yeah, yeah.
To your
I mean,
point,
yeah, but also that's probably, you know, HR driven, and HR is typically, you know, very risk averse. So it's probably a way that helps them weed out people that might be a problem, you know, even if these are
meaning
whatever
people
that
that are too
means.
entrepreneurial.
For example,
Do you
yeah, but it
think
could be
that's
also,
part
yeah.
of the reason I'm not in corporate America? Are you saying that?
Yeah, yeah. And also just the sheer amount of, you know, they need to get all these things a way for them to help, you know, filter out, just get the, you know, number of resumes to sort, you know, down to a reasonable level to, you know, send on for interviews and such.
Yeah, especially nowadays when
And
with
it
the
pushes,
they get
yeah, pushes the work onto the applicant rather than, you know, so.
Yeah. Cool. So let me ask you something. So what is it? What would you say your ideal client looks like nowadays?
Okay, so I mean, I've been doing, I still have been doing a number of advising. So right now, I'm trying to make this move from, I want to focus on the content of what I've done as an advisor, whether it's working with, you know, that not so much anymore the applicants MBA and grad schools, but, you know, maybe the first time entrepreneurs, the wantrepreneurs, as I call them, you know, career changers. But I want to deal it like I had with the magazines and creating products. So I like advising. I'm comfortable with it. I'm good at it, but I'm seeing the limitations of it. And I think that there's a whole other groups of people that either can't afford one-on-one advising, or don't want it for another reason, or they see it's a sign of weakness or something else that I'd like to impact. So what I've been working on is, you know, finding that, you know, that business model that does that business model. And it's probably back in the media area. So it's been like, for me, that's been sort of like a lots of trial and error, you know, lots of errors. Like that's not that, it's not it, not this, but, you know, sort of like the, something like Edison's, you know, I figured out 10,000 things that don't work on those lines.
Right.
So I don't really have an ideal client. In fact, in some ways I never did, because I like the sort of variety of I like fresh challenges. So I think sort of like they're more complicated. So that's why I think my ideal client has got to be found more, you know, back to sort of the, you know, quantity as opposed to a particular quality.
Okay.
So now I've been working on, I've been working on a few products. So the one I started several months ago, and this comes back from helping the people write about themselves for MBA essays and personal statements, is I'm creating a guide to writing your own obituary and eulogy. So I was working on a bio writing guide because I thought it had practical and social media. People need it for their own websites, but I think with last year, well, still this year, and the COVID, people are thinking a lot about death. 2020 was all about hindsight. So I'm trying to put that together and give something that's that has a sort of deliverable, but at the same time gives people methods to do that sort of like reflection on their life. And now I've kind of moving it where I'm targeting actually younger people the better, because not the ones who actually kind of probably likely to use an obituary anytime soon, but need obituary, but in a sense where they can they have more opportunities to change their life well before that and avoid
I have a
regret.
friend of mine, another mentor, that actually has a program called Live Your Life on Purpose.
Mm.
And the first thing you do is write your ideal obituary.
Oh, great.
What would you like to be said? And then from there, he starts the back engineering and planning on what you need to do 20 years from now, what you need to have accomplished. 10, 5, 1, then just drop it down. Basically, it's guided to the business side.
Right.
You get down to the daily activities and daily things that you have to do if you're going to accomplish that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an exercise that I use with some of my clients that got intimidated by the essay prompts from schools leading MBA programs. So that's part of it. But also I think that there's some things, even if you don't imagine like what your life's going to be decades in the future, even if you go now, it's a few things. One is actually thinking more about this guy, New York Times columnist David Brooks, who calls it, makes this distinction between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And we're a culture that really emphasizes, the resume, the CV stuff, and not enough about that stuff long term. So I think one is sort of like, how do you make that transition while you still can? Another aspect is writing about yourself in the third person is very effective. There's something called elism, and it gives you actually this additional perspective that you don't get if you're writing of yourself in the first. So there's a lot through that you can do, right now.
Yeah.
Part of it's sort of like, letting go of like who you thought an younger version of yourself thought you had to be, or maybe it wasn't even your younger version of yourself. It was the peers and parents or other influencers that you're not so aware of. They were, expecting you to be some particular way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you
I've
heard
never
of
doing something
Jess?
like that. That's
Sorry,
the-
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just saying I never heard of that.
I was going to ask, have you
Interesting.
ever heard of Jesse Itzler?
Jesse Itzler?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So he's got a program that's called something like Building Your Life Resume,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically taking it away from the traditional resume to your life and your activities and stuff like that. He's a funny guy. He started as a street rapper, then he built what was it, Marquis Jets, I think it was called, and he sold it to Warren Buffett. And he was involved in creating Seco coconut water. He's got a couple of books that, the language is out there, but the first one, he got to a point, he said, you know what, I wonder what it is to live at the extreme. So he hired David Goggins, the Navy SEAL, to live with him for a month. And Goggins said, okay, I will, but when I say you do something, you do it. No questions asked. And it's crazy.
Yeah, that's gotta be funny.
It's very funny because the language is up there. Goggins is great, but MF is like every other word.
This is like punctuation.
Sort of there. And then Itzler did the opposite one, another book called Living with Monks, where he went and lived with monks for almost a month.
That'd be even harder.
Both books are hilarious. This guy says, this guy's hilarious. As I said, he's done a couple of big businesses. His wife is actually the founder of Spanx, the leggings.
Okay. Sarah Blakely, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Jesse
Okay.
is, so both of them are entrepreneurs.
Right, right.
But
I
he
think
puts a
Spanx-
totally different spin to the whole thing.
It came out when I was still living in Mexico City, and I started seeing it on the internet, and I had no idea what it was. And then I found out it's this, multi-million dollar business, and I think at that time it was really primarily for the U.S. market.
Mm.
Yeah.
She started it with something like 500 or 5,000 bucks, something like
Yeah.
that in her retirement plan. And so, but those two books, if you want to learn
I'll check it
and
out.
entertain yourself, both
Mhm.
are really good. Very cool.
Are you anticipating staying in that section, that where you are now, or and just doing things globally, virtually from there? Are you thinking about?
Yeah, no, actually I want to go back abroad. So as soon as I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for example, Washington DC, though I grew up around there, it's not the right place for me. It's just, I felt like a bit of like reverse culture shock, and it's a very, it's an interesting mix of people. They are a mix of ambitious and idealistic, which I think is interesting, but incredibly risk averse and even more like ambiguity averse. So, so it's been a challenge. I mean, I really got to see how people that way, how they get that way. They sort of take the well-trod path and they really kind of like they, climb a ladder, claim a ladder.
It sounds almost the opposite of a Silicon Valley.
Right, and eventually a lot of it they realize it doesn't work for them. But it's really hard as they get older. The switching costs get harder. The cost of failure gets harder.
Yeah.
So it's you're a lot of things. If you have kids and a mortgage, a lot, and you're living in an expensive metropolitan area, it's a lot less likely to do that.
So were you? I mean, obviously we've got all the COVID stuff still going on.
Right.
Is it leaning more towards sort of globe-trotting as you've done before, or country and staying there?
Yeah. So I'm kind of, I'm trying to decide that. I think there is that sort of like, just to be somewhere else. I'd like to see more of Asia, which I, haven't seen that much of. I mean, I've, lived in, Southwest Asia, lived in India a bit, but there's more that I'd like to see there. And I'm not sure if it's important for me to be geographic. And I think there's things with what we saw, just this sort of, maybe the Zoom renaissance of who you connect with virtually means that you probably can live in a less cosmopolitan place and still get that sort of connection, whether it's sort of intellectual or very niche, expertise in the virtual level. So I think that opens. I have a few things I could go into, but yeah, it's just at this point, sort of, it's kind of,
Right.
speculation. Probably bore you what I'm thinking is, but I want to,
maybe we can have you back to hear those ideas as the year progresses, and hopefully, I know we're all I'm not a big fan of airports. I actually like to be able to travel with one in a sort of quote unquote normal pre-COVID setting, even though that was already annoying enough.
Yeah.
So
Can't get
I'll
everywhere
do
but
a
car.
pre-9/11 travel, but
Those days aren't coming back.
no, I know.
I'm not going to ask for that much, but I hear you. We thought it was hard back then. It was so easy.
Yeah.
And that's when I was traveling 95% of the time. So when that happened, that it really, it sucked.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of flexible enough that I would, I live where it makes sense for what I'm trying to do, but even that sort of an emerging property. I mean, I'm trying this with this guy to this is my first first fully digital product to sell. And then when that happens, move that. So if that tends up being something that's, doesn't matter what time zone I live in, but it might, because I haven't, I'm not, I haven't, settled really on I'm a bit agnostic in terms of the business model. And even to a certain degree, like what the product is this, I've written, like I have a manuscript, but whether I turn that into a, just simply like an ebook or printed book or a series of workshops or some other sort of community is
Yeah.
up in the air.
And if the two of you know better than I do, it's the launch phase. You have to be more available for whoever your key constituents
Right.
are. And when it's well established, if you're off the grid because of time zone differences or whatever, it doesn't matter as much.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Stefan, I want to make sure Emilio and I are trying to get better at having our guests share their contact information
Sure.
before we forget. Can you let,
Well, I
can you
was
let
gonna
everyone who's
ask, but
listening and watching?
his email address is right there on the screen.
Yeah, my email address is in my name. And if you go to BIEL.SKI, that'll take you to my it's like my business card of a website with the links to my projects. And so you'll see Professions on Purpose, which is basically my main laboratory. That's been there for a while. But sometimes things like this obituary project deserve their own website. So I created other websites as well.
And you're also on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, actually, again, you go to that website and has my LinkedIn and I guess Twitter and such.
Very cool. And if you're on Facebook, we'll tag you there. If not,
okay. Yeah, I'm not frequently, but I will.
well, we have.
I tell you.
Yeah, if Andrew's your friend, he can tag you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
do the same in LinkedIn.
Because we go on Facebook Live, a lot of people will just naturally, those viewers, and thank you all that are continuing to join us live on Facebook Live. We just naturally engage you for the moment we can.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well,
yeah, very cool.
Stefan, thank you again for being a part of this show. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was fun.
Andrew's smiling, so. Although he normally is like that.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a jolly person.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to see you after so many years, and as always, you're working on fascinating stuff. So we'll stay in touch. We'll have you back.
Okay.
Here to hear how things are progressing and developing.
All right. Well, take care.
And if you're ever in Dallas, let us know.
I shall.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
This has been Success Paradigms with Emilio Garcia and Mr. Andrew Barker. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Sounds drive.
That was fun.